We've all had projects that have drug on longer than we wanted them to. I've had this 66 Fairlane Gasser project for well over a year, and it's mostly just sat. That ends right now. If you need motivation to get your derelict project started, stick around, because I am bound and determined to kick this thing into gear. Will it run? You're damn right it will. I don't even really like beer. I'm more of a cocktail person. But this just seems right. What's up, guys? I'm Jeremy. Welcome back to Catfish Motorsports. This is my 1966 Fairlane Gasser project, and I've been really itching to get it on the road with my eye on the Gas B class at Drag Week. Unfortunately, this is an expensive project, and it's just kind of taken me a lot of time to get together the parts financially to make a real episode out of this car. So I think we're going to split it into two parts. First episode is going to be getting the engine running. Second episode is going to be engine running to car driving down the road. I don't quite have all the parts yet, but come hell or high water, this engine is going to run by the end of this episode. Now, you guys have probably seen this car in the background of other episodes if you've watched my channel at all, but I've not really talked about the car itself overly much, so let's take a look at it. Now, first of all, for me, this is a really nice car to start with. This is a lot nicer than I normally have started with in the past. This was a big swing financially for me. I mean, it's got door panels. What other project do I have that has door panels? I actually traded my green Porsche 911 for this car. Not quite straight up, but car non-running with the engine that came fresh from the machine shop, etc. A little bit of wheeling and dealing, horse trading, and we got it done. As part of that, the guy that I bought this from was a professional fabricator. So part of the deal was I had him put a Speedway straight axle kit under this thing because I knew I wanted to make a gasser for Drag Week. I do have a 120 volt welder. I can stick two pieces of metal together, but if it comes to a weld breaking and possibly killing me, I will usually outsource that to somebody else. Now, I've had a couple of people, when this car's been in the background of other episodes, tell me that this is too late to be a gasser. And yes, it is on the late side to be a gasser, but the gas class for the NHRA ran all the way up till I believe 1972, which makes this car and the engine, which started production in 1968, legal for both the Gas A and the Gas B categories at Drag Week. And that's all I care about. Is it a little on the late side? Yeah. Is it legal? Also, yes. We're good. If you want to complain about it, knock yourself out. I don't really care. I won't be just another guy with a Tri-5 Chevy out there. Nothing against Tri-5s. I like Tri-5s. But let's be a little bit different. Now, this car and its power plants has a lot of firsts for me. This is a 429 base stroker. It's a 503 with trick flow heads and a kind of medium roller cam. Now, the builder thinks that this should make 700 horsepower. I don't think it quite has enough cam for that, but it should make 660, 670 all day without breaking a sweat. Other firsts, front and mid plate setup. Totally new for me. Never done that before. Both of them, while functional right now, are kind of mangled from both the previous owner and myself moving stuff around to make sure it would fit. At some point, I'll probably buy new plates for this after I'm 100% sure I have everything where it needs to be, and then I'll cut them new, probably paint them so they look pretty. Something I probably would not have done, but again, I'm taking over somebody else's partial project, and they had already spent a bunch of money on nice parts. This is an external wet sump oiling system. So what that means is, unlike a dry sump, which would have an external tank and an external pump, this has the external pump, which is belt driven off of a cog belt, but it still pulls oil from an oil pan in the stock location. Now, normally you would do that when you're super challenged on how big of an oil pan you can put, and you don't quite have room for a pump inside the oil pan or whatever. This is not the case here. So in my opinion, you're not really getting the benefits of a dry sump. You just have an extra something hanging off the front of your engine. I guess the benefit is, and I've not tested this yet, but I'm told the benefit is you can set the pump to where it should give you whatever PSI you want no matter what your engine RPM is. So, you were driving around in your normal vehicle with an internal oil pump. Once the oil gets hot, you're probably going to be 60, 70 pounds under load, but when you're at idle, it's probably going to be more like 20. In theory, this is going to be much more consistent. If you set it to where it gives you 60 PSI, it's going to give you pretty close to 60 PSI at all times. We're going to test that theory here when we get the thing running. So like I said, I probably wouldn't have done it because I just don't really think the benefits are that great, but it's a $1,000 pump and like a $1,000 oil pan. I wasn't just going to give that stuff away. We're going to roll with it. One of the downsides of that is my crank snout now sticks way out, and in a situation where this big ass engine doesn't really belong in this kind of smallish engine bay, my radiator clearance is not good. So we're going to have to get real cute with our cooling system here in order to cool this big beast down when we don't have a lot of room in front of the engine. We'll talk about how we're going to do that later. Part of the reason this has been taking a long time to get together the finances to kind of get this car on the road is I made the poor financial but high testosterone decision of going with a manual transmission. If I would have just used a C6 Ford automatic, I probably could have already had this thing on the road, because that would have saved me a lot of money. Now this is a bone stock LS1 style out of a 4th gen like Camaro Trans Am that is not going to hold up to the power of this engine, but it should be enough to get me going down the road. And honestly, because I can't put my foot in it because it'll kill it, it should keep me on my best behavior long enough to give the clutch a good break-in session. But we will be putting a T56 Magnum in this sooner rather than later. And because these hold their value pretty well, I know because I just had to buy this one, as long as I don't torch it, I should be able to sell this and make a pretty good chunk back of what I put into it, if not everything. This guy is an SFI approved blow-proof bell housing that mates a big block Ford to a GM T56 transmission. It was about $1,000 by itself. The clutch is a McLeod RXT that was also about $1,000. $1,400 if you include the flywheel, which I have not installed this yet. I don't know if this is going to be installed on this video or the next video, but one way or another, we'll get it done. Interesting tidbit. I am not new to manual transmissions. I've owned several manual vehicles. I've probably put 100,000 miles on a manual transmission in my life. I have never changed or installed a clutch. Just kind of an interesting thing that's just never come up in my hot rodding. I have changed dual mass flywheels and aircraft propeller systems. I have never changed a clutch in a classic car though. So another first for me in this project. And there's tons of other little first small stuff. This has a Willwood reverse mount clutch and brake master cylinder assembly that mounts under the dash. I've never had to have a cage put in a car before. Just a lot of stuff, which goes into why this has taken me forever. A lot of stuff have just been me sitting here off camera figuring it out. Wouldn't be very fun to film because it's just a whole lot of cussing, honestly. So 66 Fairlane episode, let's get it running. Here's our list. We're going to wire the car. You probably saw when I was showing you the engine that I've kind of already started that, but nothing's terminated. It's just sort of started to route it through the vehicle. Distributor, have a plan, don't have one of those yet. We're going to go with a progression ignition distributor because it gives me a high degree of control, but it's pretty simple to install. Radiator, again, sort of have a plan, haven't actually bought it yet. Oil line, remember we're running that external pump, so there's a bunch of AN lines that have to come out and around the engine. And they're all big boys. They're 12s and 16s, which means the fittings are really expensive. So I'm about to spend like $300 just in AN line and fittings. Starter. I have one. It came with the car. I don't know that it's going to work because there's some weirdness that gets involved with a 429 to the flywheel that I have, which is basically an FE flywheel from what I understand. Manual transmissions and 429s get a little bit weird. I have make headers on here. So I've got 3 different sets of headers for this car that all require some different level of fabrication. I was going to try to make a set of fender well headers out of a set of big block Chevy headers that I have. But I think while possible, it's just going to take a ton of time only to find out that they might hit the tire. So I recently got my hands on, just by straight sheer dumbass Irish luck, there was a guy that had a set of Mad Dog headers for Fox body with an engine plate that I bought, and they're real close to fitting. So we're still going to have to do some stuff to make those work, but it's not that bad. 7, we've got prime the engine. This is a super expensive engine. I want to make sure I understand how that oil pump works. So we're going to make sure that we get that oil pump running, probably just with a drill on the pump end itself, and make sure we're priming this engine before we fire it because it's an expensive engine. Let's not kill it. And last, I've got gauges. We'll see if we actually get to that or not. I had plans on bead rolling a piece of aluminum to put in the stock location for the gauges, and then I've got some gauges to put in there. I don't know if that's going to happen. What we might do is just use a cheap set of gauges just so we can be sure that we have water temperature and oil pressure and leave it at that for this episode. And I'm sure I'll think of a couple other things along the way as we're doing it. But let's get started. All right, back out here today. I didn't do anything yesterday but film the intro. Didn't actually have anything come up or anything. I just had an acute attack of laziness and didn't get anything done. But we're going to try to remedy that today. First thing we're going to do is header. Because while I've got the driver's side to fit pretty good, it does just barely kiss the oil pan, so I got to put one dent and one tube on that side. the passenger side, which you would think would be the easier side because there's no steering or anything over there, is a problem. Specifically, it hits the motor plate exactly where I have it mounted. So I have to move the mount that I've already welded the frame in there. Try to get in here the headers that I'm going to use. This is, I believe, the number 2 tube, 3 tube. This is the 3 tube. You can see that I can't get in there and it hits right exactly where I have this mount in my mid plate already. So you can see I've already drilled another hole up here. So what we're going to do is unbolt the engine, move it forward to give myself a little bit of room. I'm going to cut the old mount off and shave the mid plate right there. And then we're going to weld a new mount right behind where this plate currently is. So here's our headers that we're going to use. They're raw. I'll probably coat them at some point. They're from Mad Dog Headers. They're big 2-inch tubes, which if you guys aren't familiar with like the 385 series big block Fords, 429s, 460s, headers are kind of tough out there, especially if you want something for a big cube engine. A lot of the headers available are only like 1 3/4. I've seen a few a little bit bigger, but it's very difficult to get 2-inch or bigger tubes in like a non-race design, which that's what this is. That's why it doesn't have a, you know, collector flange on the end. So it's something I'll have to do because I am going to put exhaust on this car. Now, this being a gasser, I really wanted to use fender wells, and I have a set of big block Chevy fender wells. Big block Chevy. I already cut the flange off of one of them because I was going to try and mate a Cobra Jet style big block Ford flange to it. And the spacing is very close. The big problem is big block Chevrolet flanges are round port. Big block Ford flanges are oval port. Now I could buy stubby tubes, but it was just going to be more money. It was going to be a lot of work. And then on top of, I would have had to cut a chunk out of the inner fender on either side, even to get them in to see how good they fit. And then I was really concerned that they were going to hit the tire on like shock bounces. So it would have just been a whole lot of work and maiming the car just to find out that they weren't going to work because they were going to hit the tire. And that's where those Mad Dog headers I showed you come in. Those popped up relatively locally. I had to come out of pocket a lot more than I wanted to. I paid $480, $500 for them. But still, that was a bargain because if I would have had Mad Dog make those, I think they're more like $700. So it was a good deal overall. But when you're trying to keep costs down, it still hurts. Sometimes you just got to make business decisions. Would you rather spend a little bit more money to make things easier on yourself? Or would you rather donate a whole bunch of your time to something? And more often than not, I'd rather save the time. So here we go. We're going to move the engine forward, saws all the old piece off, weld this new tab in there, and then hopefully we're good to go. Well, that was not a particularly good weld. I'm not a very good welder by any standards, but that one wasn't even good by mine. The reason I didn't do it like that from the start on the top is because I can't get to the back. So now I kind of tried to put a little too much on the front, but I can't get all the way around like I could with it on the side, the way I originally had it mounted. So if one spot's a little bit weak, there's still 3 good ones, and we're going to put a brace in on that side anyway. And you got a transmission mount. I'm not overly worried about it, but still sucks. A little bit disappointed. So it's all time. All right, engine is back in place. And we were mostly successful here. I mentioned I didn't love the weld. And truth be told, when I have the cage built for this, because again, I'm not that much of a welder, I'm not building a whole cage for this by hand myself, I'll probably ask them to look at my motor mounts and just see if they feel like, you need to add some strength here. And this side was close on the mount already. I have a little more room on the other side. These cars aren't always as straight as we like to think they are. But with this, I gave myself a little extra room here so I can slip some paper in it all the way around. So now, let's see if that was enough to get the header in there. Oh, please work. Please work, please work, please work. Oh, we are closer. I think I'm definitely going to have to dent the tube, but I also can see a spot down here, kind of a hangover on the frame where it's hitting. So we'll take a Sawzall to that real quick and then come back and see what it looks like then. I do think I'm going to have to dent, what is this, the 1, 2, 3, the 4 tube to clear the starter area there. Good morning. Well, the headers yesterday turned into a bit of a debacle, and none of it was particularly interesting. It was just me beating the shit out of my expensive headers, taking them off, test fitting them, beating them some more, putting them back on, cutting small parts off of my car that I deemed not entirely necessary. It's also a very high cursing job. So we just turned the cameras off, finished that up. Like I said, wasn't particularly interesting or fun for me. It's a whole lot of aluminum dust all over my arms, but I've swept that up today. Give us a little bit more of a clean work area. We're gonna work a little bit on our oiling system. So I've got a remote mount filter here. We're gonna mount that to our inner fender. I've already got some of the lines just sort of in there. None of them are cut to fit. They're just kind of loose right now. And I gotta reiterate that I probably would not have done this. This sort of remote filter job just seems kind of overkill for this car and doesn't really gain you much, and it really kind of clutters up the engine bay. I don't love it, but I have all the parts. We're gonna give it a shot, and then maybe it'll make a believer out of me. I'm not sure. We got parts sort of slowly trickling in. I just got fittings to start my oil filter adapter setup up here. And then I find out they're wrong. I just found out the one for my oil pan wasn't quite right, and I have to order them again and wait for them again. So you're gonna see me change clothes a lot in this, because while you guys are watching this all in one shot, hopefully multiple times if you're really cool, this is taking me days, weeks, hopefully not stretching into months, but maybe. And to be honest, I kind of have a new respect for the Mike Finnegans and Tony Angelos of the world who are doing this, because this is a really difficult project to work on, as opposed to like if you were, say, just buying a 78 C10 and working on it and getting it running. While that can be, you know, a bitch all the way around too, it's nothing like this where absolutely nothing fits. Everything is custom, everything fights, and I find myself all the time getting frustrated and turning the camera off so I can sit there and work on it without worry about filming, because so much of it is fiddly and it's not going to be fun for you guys, and it's just me sitting there muttering to myself trying to figure out how to make something work. And it's really tough to make an episode out of. So like I said, I got a big new respect for those guys who are doing that with, you know, non-traditional cars where everything's fully custom, like Finnegan's 59 Cadillac or Tony's Aston Martin Fox Body Mustang. You know, I understand why they struggle with those projects so much now, because it's tough. And you buy something and then it's not quite right, and then you got to decide if you want to modify that or try a different part, and you got to wait for shipping, and or just like the engine plates, you know, these all need to be redone again now because I've had to cut on them multiple times, and so did the previous owner, and now they're too thin in a few places, and you just end up buying a lot of things 2-3 times and doing a lot of rework 2-3 times. Anyway, I'm putting my fittings in here. Now I'm using a little bit of aviation gasket. I think it's also known as Permatex number 2 or 3. It's a fuel resistant liquid gasket maker. It doesn't completely harden. It's really good for oil and gas fittings because, like I said, it's fuel resistant. Now, if you're using brass, a lot of times you can just ramrod brass fittings in there tight enough that they're going to seal on their own when you're talking about NPT fittings. But these are aluminum because they're cheaper and it's easier to get in the bends that I need. So like this is a swivel fitting. Pet peeve of mine trying to get 90-degree fittings in, because half the time you get them in a place where they're tight and they're aimed in the wrong direction. So I spent a little bit of extra money here and got a swivel fitting. You can't get that in brass anyway, so aluminum it is. The only downside to this aviation gasket stuff is it can get a little bit messy, and because it's brown, it's not the most attractive color in the world. Non-marring AN wrenches, nice to have. You don't have to have them. I've certainly put on plenty of AN fittings with regular wrenches, but these are nice to hopefully not scratch up your aluminum fittings overly much. This car in particular is also kind of a pain to film with because it's a gasser. The front end's jacked way up in the air. It's really hard to get you guys at a camera angle that you can get down in and see what I'm doing. All right, so there's those. I can't make my dash 16 line right now because, like I said, I found out that fitting that goes down to the oil pan pickup is going to stick out too far and hit the header, which that passenger header is a completely different nightmare that I'm calling in some extra help for. We'll show you that a little bit later. I can, however, make my dash 12 lines. So this is running from my oil pump up to my oil filter assembly, and then from the oil filter assembly, normally that would be your oil filter that mounts to the block. I've got an adapter on it with a dash 12 90-degree fitting sticking out of it. So that'll run from here down to that. So you guys may have seen this before, but just in case you haven't, where I'm gonna cut my line here to make my AN fittings, I've got tape over it. You can even see from the factory, they had black tape over the end of it too, where they cut it. That keeps the end from fraying, and then you just slide the end right over the tape. And this is nothing special. This is just normal masking tape. The seal is all on the inside, so what happens on the outside doesn't really make a difference. It just got nasty outside all of a sudden. Another tech tip you may or may not know when you're making these, I've got my one nut slid down over the hose. Now when you push this down and look down to where the hose comes up and mates with the bottom of the nut, you want just a little bit of an air gap there. You don't want it all the way up. Leave yourself like a 1/16 or so of an inch. You don't want it all the way pressed up against. You also want to lube everything up. Doesn't matter really what. This is an oil line, so I've just got a little bit of clean engine oil both on the threads here and down inside. And once you get it started, then you just screw them home. If you have AN wrenches, great. If not, just use regular wrenches. It'll be fine. Just be careful. Don't try to scratch them up too bad. But when you lube them up, it does make this go down a lot easier. It's a bummer the fitting on the pan side doesn't work. I really wanted to try and just spin that oil pump over today, fill the pan up with oil, and just make sure we could make it pump out, just like turning it with, you know, an air ratchet or something like that. But I'm gonna have to wait for that because I just had to order a new fitting. It's exhausting, both personally and to my bank account. So now our pump side is complete. So we still need to do the supply side. You see I've got my one big dash 16 line in down here that's going to run down to the oil pan. I just don't have the other side of that equation yet. But I ordered it, it's on the way. Yeah, it's really fun just buying AN fitting after AN fitting, because those are, like, everybody knows how affordable those are. Speaking of parts trickling in, Radiator came in yesterday. So this bad boy is enormous. Now this is super cheap. This was $109 off eBay. And it's only a 1-inch core, but it's an enormous, like 18 by 27.5-inch core. It was the biggest thing that I could get that would fit between the frame rails. Unfortunately, I was so hung up on width, I sort of forgot to take height into consideration, or at least I measured it wrong one way or the other. So while we fit, we've got a little bit of room in between our accessory drive, which sticks way out. Fan's going to be tough in this thing. It's a little bit too tall. Now this side, I actually do think will fit with a hood. This side, on the other hand, probably just clips it. Also, you know, we're up. Now I'm going to cut this core support anyway to make it a little bit wider and taller so you get more of your core in airflow through the support. But it is a lot higher than I need it to be. So I think what I'm ultimately going to do is notch the frame slightly on each side so I can sink the radiator down about 1.5 inches, 2 inches, was just another little gift that this project has given me, just more work. I could send it back and try to find a radiator that would maybe be a little bit shorter, but still be just as wide. But that is a big block Ford radiator. It has the right ends on it. That's from a 1981 Bronco. Or F250, you know, any of the ones that could have come with a 460, or I think even the 351 would have the same hose sizes. So I really think I'm going to try to make that work, because what I also like about that is, while I said that one is skinny, because I was trying to give myself as much room as possible between the engine and the radiator, I know that I could take that same exact model radiator and buy one from Cold Case that would be thicker and better made and all that stuff, and maybe buy myself a little bit extra cooling if that one's not quite enough. Hopefully it is, because I really like that extra distance from the engine that it gives me. But if it's not, we have options where if I switch radiators, Now all that gets hairy again. I just had an absolute panic moment. I was out here doing a little bit of work off camera, went to spin the motor over to put it on top dead center at 0, and it wouldn't move. And I was like, how did I possibly lock this motor up? And I was going around trying to figure out what was going on. I had left, the back of the headers uncapped for a few days. I was like, there's no way that we would have gotten enough moisture in the engine to cause rust and lock the engine up. Now, I've since covered those up anyway to be safe. Turns out my ARP flywheel bolts were just a touch too long, and they were bottoming out against the main cap in the back and not allowing the motor to spin. I went and backed them all off a few turns. Now the motor spins freely. And I wouldn't say this is common, but I did, when I put in a Google search for Ford 429 flywheel bolts being too long, I did come up with a few that says, hey, there's not a lot of clearance back there. Anyway, you should only have about 80 thou of clearance. And some people said that they'd had trouble with these being just a smidge too long. So somewhat crisis averted. I did order a new set of different ARP bolts that are 7/8 instead of a full inch long to get me out of that jam. Now we can call back to this later if we need to. When I put that flywheel on, I didn't use the spacer that was supplied with my mid plate just because it didn't look like it was gaining me anything, and everything still looked like it was going to mate up without it. It looked to me like it would be more important for an automatic to get your torque converter spacing right so you don't pull it out of the front pump. But we'll see about that. When I install the clutch, we'll see if I have to take the whole thing off, take the flywheel back off, and put that spacer in, which is going to be an adventure all on its own because that flywheel went on tight. So I'm really concerned about getting that off if I need to get it off. Now, this is kind of difficult to film, but we do have all our oil lines in now. So my dash 16 line, which required a 12A and adapter over here. So I've got a 90-degree adapter and then a 16 to a 12 adapter to get that in, and that goes up to our pump. So now our oil lines are completely in. Oh, well, that popped off. That sucks. So I did have this set up there and JB welded. This is just a zip tie anchor. I had it JB welded the oil pan. Clearly, that did not survive first contact because that was there last night when I went to bed, and now it's off. So might have to rethink that. I was already having trouble with the header on the oil pan here. And with this adapter, it sticks out even further. So that's going to be a problem. So the header adventure kind of continues, but I've got my buddy Corey coming over here later today. And he's made a set of headers before where I haven't. So he's going to come over and we're going to annihilate a different set of headers I have to try to make that tube fit on the passenger side. It's the number 1 tube that goes right next to the oil pan, because this is a really wide oil pan compared to the Fox body that those headers are supposed to fit. And I also had a different problem. Let me show you that right now. So here's that header. And you notice the flange looks a little doubled. That's because this is just a flange to make a set of headers that I had for a 429 that I've got this bolted to. Note that the number 1 tube specifically is nowhere near even where the other ones aren't bad. So we've all seen the Engine Master show where it showed you can beat your headers up, and as long as you have an appropriately sized header, it's probably not going to make too big a difference in power. Here's where I made an error. This style of headers, which I really don't like these, but it is what it is with this type of car. Unfortunately, I can't buy off the shelf parts for this setup. Is like the race type. The flange is not connected. It's loose. And then we're not connected here. These are also loose. So when I was beating these tubes, because they're loose in your collector and loose at the flange, don't have anything holding them together, it changed the shape of the tube slightly, especially at the flange. And once I got them beat up enough to where they would fit on the oil pan, the holes were now wrong, especially this number 1 tube, which I had to beat the most on. So take note of that. I'm not here to tell you not to beat your headers up. Everybody's done it. And it's shown that it doesn't affect power that much. But if you don't have a traditional set of headers where your flange is one solid piece and your collector is one solid welded together piece, you need to do something about that. Especially at the flange, you need to bolt that together, bolt it to your head first, whatever you have to do. Because if you don't, you're going to move it, and then it's probably not going to line up again. And you're going to have wasted a bunch of time and beat your headers up for almost no reason. So my buddy Corey's coming over. We're going to try to cut this tube here, whoop-de-doo it out a little bit to get it away from the oil pan and reconnect it about right there. So you'll probably see a little bit of that in Fast Forward later today. like the channel motto says, ugly but functional. We got this extra tube that we just harvested from that old set of fender well headers, which I hate to lose, but I had already kind of cut them up, and they were just kind of cheap Speedway headers anyway, not that big of a deal. But so now the big tube that was the big problem works. Now I did find out once we started test fitting more, when I threw my bell housing in, has a hump for the starter, and that contacts here, which is wild because these are for a 460, even if they're not for, you know, a 66 Fairlane, you would think that it would still contact the starter hump in the same place. So I'm going to throw it in and just double check myself, but I'm pretty sure this is going to have to be cut and welded too. And I'm not going to full on just try to describe how to make a set of headers, but I'll just give you a couple pointers along the way as I'm doing it. Where there's a MIG welder, there's a way. Okay, so I threw this in to test fit it, and I think we might be within dent range without having to take this pipe off. So we don't get into the same pickle we got in the first time where when I dented it doesn't line up anymore. I have taken this flange that I showed you earlier and bolted it on tight. So, and we're also in the collector back here. So between that and here, we're tied together like a normal header, and hopefully when I beat the hell out of this, it doesn't distort badly again and not allow us to line up our bolt holes. And the area I'm denting is the area that I would be removing anyway if I decide to cut this tube out. So no harm, no foul if I have to cut it. So I decided to just go ahead and dent the headers that I had to get around the starter. I may still determine later on that I'd rather make a pipe for that one tube, but I told you that I'd show you how we made the number one tube for that header over there. And there's really not much to it. All we did was take my saw down here and make pie cuts. This is 0 degrees on the bottom, 15 degrees on top. You can kind of do whatever you need. You don't have to have a nice fancy saw like this or a bandsaw or something that sets degrees for you, but it is really helpful. That said, if you were just trying to get down and dirty, you could definitely just be careful and cut these out with, you know, your cutoff wheel or whatever. Most domestic headers that you guys can be working with are mild steel, which gives you a lot of wiggle room. You can close some pretty big gaps with mild steel, where if you were working with stainless, it'd be a lot more difficult. Similarly, if you have a TIG machine, you can make the welds on headers a lot prettier, but MIG will get it done. That's what I did. It's not the prettiest thing in the world, but they shouldn't leak and they're together. I have spent very literal hours between last night and this morning trying to get all these header bolts in. I think I've got them dented and the new pipe made enough to where everything will fit. But man, I hate these separated flanges. I never want to do that again. So I actually think the easier thing to do in this case is going to be to remove the collector, tighten down all the tubes, and then when you have enough flex at the back end of the tube, I think that's going to be easier to manipulate to make everything line up than it is to try to get individual bolt holes to line up here where I'm trying to put pressure and screw it in at the same time. But in the meantime, it's tightened down enough up here that I'm going to go down one more time, throw my bell housing up there and make sure that is going to fit without me making a new tube on that number. What is that? 4 tube. Ford number's weird. So Ford is 1, 2, 3, 4 down the passenger side, 5, 6, 7, 8 down the driver's side. So guys, it's Saturday. I have been released from the bonds of servitude that is a boring office job. And we get to work on this a little bit more. I've got more parts coming that are going to be here on Monday, including break-in oil, header gaskets, some other small stuff that I need to get this thing running. In the meantime, what we're going to do right now is work on notching the frame a little bit so that radiator that I showed you guys earlier will sit a touch lower. The radiator cap will clear the hood and all that stuff. I'm doing this simply as I can. You can see I've already got on the passenger side, I've got an L notch cut out of the frame. I'm going to take a fresh piece of steel, bend it in an L, and stick it in here. So it will essentially function something like that, and we'll fill it in with MIG weld. Do the same thing to the other side, and we'll get the radiator set down about 1.5 inches lower. Now, I don't normally advocate for working with cutoff wheels or anything like that without the guard on, but I just flat out couldn't get it in there with it on. So don the full face mask, and we're just going to make a couple of notch cuts with this, and then I'm going to use a little bit of a safer tool to really get in there all the way around.
Watching your mouth move, damn you look stupid. I feel like everyone's a stranger. Small talk with your narcissistic neighbor. She's real hot, but they said to never date her. Ha, I
Okay, it's the next day again. I put some paint on my crappy welds overnight, and then today went to Lowe's. This is just like a window, not caulk, but padding, window padding, whatever you want to call it. And I put that down inside of the little slots that I cut into the frame. So now the radiator just sits down in those like a saddle mount essentially, and I'm just going to bolt it in from the top. I've also got two little pieces of this stuff. Now to do that, I've just got a piece of aluminum here that I bent into an L, and I've got a J-nut on it. I don't know how well you can see that. But essentially, I'm going to bolt this up here like this, and then just tech screw in. It's not particularly elegant, but it's going to work. Eventually, I'll either do it a little bit cleaner, or I'll at least paint these so they match whatever the color of the core support is. So, let's take and bolt that bad boy in right there. All right, that is one down. I'm gonna make one more of these to go over here, and then we're good to go on the radiator. We can move on. Okay, radiator hoses. Now that the radiator is more or less where it's gonna live, we're gonna make some hoses for it. Now you can do this in more than one way. It would be great if I could just go to the parts store and buy one that fit the car, go to Rock Auto and click the box. Unfortunately, like everything else on this car, nothing belongs where it goes, so you just kind of got to make it work. Now, one thing you can do and still kind of buy off the shelf parts is before you go to the parts store, take a piece of TIG rod, an old wire hanger, whatever you want to do, and bend it into the shape that you're going to need, and then just go to the parts store, ask them to let you go in the back where all the radiator hoses are, and sort of mix and match on shape. Hope you can get one with the right ends that's close enough in shape. You can also buy fancy pre-made bends like this, and then put it together with couplers. Works, looks really cool, looks clean, can get a little bit expensive. These are about 20 bucks a piece. So what's the cheaper low-cost option? Well, that's kind of what I'm going to do here. We're still going to use couplers, just like we would use if we were using all of these little pre-made bends. But the cheaper way to do it is to just go buy some hoses that have the right ends on them that already have a bunch of bends in them. Then you can just cut the hoses where you need to and use the couplers to make the hose the shape you want it to be. Let's give it a shot. So we're going to start with this upper hose here. And this one is 1.5 on each end. So it should be a little easier than the bottom. The bottom is a 2-inch outlet on the water pump and a 1.75 on the radiator. And what can we make work here? I mean, I'll be honest, that's pretty damn close right there, because that'll straighten out. That's pretty close, just making one cut right there. See if I can move that around and make it any better. But that's pretty damn good. What happens if we go this way? Sort of same thing. You're going to kind of stretch it a little bit in a weird way. But that would definitely get the job done. That would for sure get the job done. And we're not, you got to make sure when you're pulling it like I am that you're not introducing an area where you pinched it flat, but because we're not going tight on the bends, we're actually pulling the bends out a little bit in both cases. So we're pulling this bend out and then pulling this bend out a little bit. And man, I think that'll work. And I should mention, like, both of these radiator hoses and little pieces of metal like I made this with are the pieces of metal that I put back in the frame after I notched it out. It was all stuff I had laying around. Like radiator hoses, if they're good, don't throw them away, because you never know when you can make them fit on something else. Scrap metal, even if it's only a few inches long, you might be able to repurpose it for something like this. So unless it's really tiny, I don't throw metal especially away, because you never know when you're gonna be able to use it again. Now the lower hose is gonna be a fight, because we've got to contend with my oil pump and this line coming into the oil pump. And it's just going to be harder for me to show you guys what I'm doing just by virtue of the fact that it's buried down inside of the engine bay. So I'm going to make a few cuts and see what I can make it look like, and then I'll show you guys a little bit later after I've got a little bit closer. It is late, but if you've never just randomly walked out at like 1 in the morning and started working on one of your cars, I don't know if we could be friends. I did not get nearly as much done as I wanted to do today. I ended up watching the Dolphins lose for about 3 hours and then mowed the yard. Probably shouldn't have done either of those things, but I got more done. But c'est la vie. So this is the carburetor that came with that 66 and the engine. It's very nice. I believe it's an XP. This is probably an $800 carburetor. It's an 850 double pumper. Does have an electric choke
It is mechanical secondaries. And I'm just going to take the bowls off real quick here, and I'm going to write down the numbers on the jet sizes. So once I put the wideband in, based on what we see, you know, we can sort of make some adjustments from there. Pop this big fuel log off. It's got really nice parts on it. I mean, it has one of these guys, which I've seen for sale, and I've seen people use them. I've never used one. So hopefully I have all the pieces to actually hook this up. If not, we'll adjust fire and use something else. It's also got a really big, beefy fuel log here. This is nice. The only problem with stuff like this is if you're not running a spacer, a lot of times you will find you will not be able to use super big, beefy pieces like this because they'll actually hit your intake. So if you don't have a tall single plane, which I do have a tall single plane, but if you don't have a big, tall intake and maybe even a 1-inch spacer on top of that, you might find that stuff like this runs into your intake. A lot of times when you're taking apart old Holleys that still have those brown quart gaskets, they will be a huge fight to get off. But this is a new carburetor, probably has those blue ones. It'll probably pop right off. Just had to give it a love tap with a hammer. It came off. These can be difficult to read. I am fairly sure that it's 78 now that I can get it out and actually look at it up close. The other one that was a little bit more easily visible, it was stamped. The number was stamped on the line. So it was kind of hard to see. And here's a trick for you guys. I've got pretty good eyesight, but if you don't, your iPhone probably has better eyesight than you do. You can zoom in pretty close and you might actually find it easier to read the number on that than with the bare eye. I don't know where all these flies came from, but driving me crazy. I've never wished anything good on a spider in my life, but bro, I really hope a spider eats you. Buzzing around being a dick. Okay, primaries are 78s. Let's check the secondaries. They might be the same. All right, classic error when you put the fuel bowl back on a Holley. Forgetting to put the booster under the arm. I do this all the time. So now I got to pop this bowl back off so I can reset that with the booster under the arm. Both bowls are checked. Both accelerator pumps are now in their proper position. The only other thing I'm going to do to prepare this for getting fired is I'm going to take my idle control screws, which this is a 4-corner idle mixture carb, and I'm just going to make them all the same. So I'm going to set them, some people argue, you know, just set them all to 1. I usually set them all to 1.5 out. So we're going to do that. So we're going to turn them in until they stop, and then I'm going to turn them all out 1.5 turns. Oil. Now, do you need break-in oil when you have a roller cam? This car has a hydraulic roller camshaft, and that's probably going to spark a little bit of debate. What I would tell you is if you had your engine built like this one was, do whatever the builder tells you to do. Because if something goes wrong, you want to be able, holy shit, that thing worked. I never get these things to work. I can't believe that worked. But if you paid a lot of money, or even didn't pay a ton of money, but if you paid any money to have someone put together an engine for you, and something goes wrong, you want to be able to go back to them and said you followed their directions. If you put together your engine yourself, and you have a hydraulic roller and you're wondering, is break-in oil worth it? I would tell you still yes, because it's peace of mind for really almost no extra money. I mean, honestly, my builder, when I called about this, he said they really only say you need to use an SAE oil, like a non-synthetic oil out there, for your first either 50 miles for a street car or first 2 to 4 passes if it's a race car, and then change it. And then you can kind of switch to whatever you want. I generally run synthetic in my high-end engines. But he said a break-in oil wouldn't hurt. This is an SAE oil, just like he recommended. And it was only $27 for 5 quarts. So you're really not costing yourself any extra money by going with most break-in oils. So rule number 1, follow whatever they told you to. Rule number 2 is it doesn't really cost you any extra, so you might as well. Now, there's an excellent chance as I do this, I'm going to find that there's a port or something I haven't plugged and we're going to spill oil everywhere. Or I'm going to spill oil just because I spill it, but we'll see. Now, this is a pretty big pan. This thing holds 8 quarts of oil. So we're going to put 8 in. I actually don't have a dipstick right now. I don't think I have this open. I can never get this thing to work correctly. I like this thing because it has a screen in it, so there's actually a bug floating in that right now. So I know I'm not going to introduce any contaminants in, but it's sort of like those gas cans that you got to press a button and hold in the funny angle to get to pour. It's sort of the same thing. Like, for the convenience that it gives you, it costs you at a different area, you know.
the cap back on this so I don't knock this over and spill it everywhere. Nobody knows the troubles I've seen. Come on, man. Now, let's try something a little different here. Now, these valve covers are really not particularly suited for these big, tall stud girdles that are on here. They look really cool. I don't know if I'm going to be able to use them long term. They don't contact, but filling oil because you have like no room before the funnel hits the stud girdle. And there's also no room for a baffle that you would like to have under your breather so you're not spitting oil everywhere. We've all seen that where, you know, there's oil coming out of the breather or the PCV valve sucking too much oil into the carburetor and causing everything to smoke and run bad. So Scott Drake, who does a lot of Ford and Mustang parts and stuff like that, they actually sell for twist-in valve covers like these, which are really kind of a Ford thing. They sell, it's just a straight tube. It's just like a 3-inch extender that you screw in and then you put a breather on top of that. And I've used those before on a 64 Galaxy I had with a 390 FE that I was having trouble with the oil coming out of the breather on that, and that solved the problem. So that might be something I could do to keep my cool valve covers and not have oil spilling over because these are really a little too short for this engine. But we also just might look into, you know, a taller, more appropriate set of valve covers for this thing too. Getting ready to prime this bad boy. Now I already disconnected a hose and ran some oil into this bucket. I did that by taking my air drill here with a 90-degree adapter attached to the front of that external oil pump, and we ran about a half pint of engine oil into this bucket here. Now, I thought I recorded that, but when I got down, I realized I hadn't. I don't know if I didn't press the button or not, but note to self, actually press the record button. Don't just think about pressing it. Audio-visual equipment apparently not big on acting on one's wishes. But anyway, we know the pump works. Next step, actually prime the engine. So I've got a mechanical oil pressure gauge hooked up right here. For actual use in cars, I actually much prefer electronic gauges. I know some of you guys don't, but these things are great. These cheap mechanical gauges with these silly little plastic lines are phenomenal for doing testing and stuff like this. I just keep one around. And yeah, you can use these. Plenty of people use them. I have used them in everyday use in your old cars. You can also switch to a copper or brass line instead of the plastic line. It's better. It's not going to have the heat issues that the plastic line does, but brass can work harden over time just from vibrating, so they're not leak-proof either. Like I said, I prefer an electronic gauge, but you be you. Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to zoom you guys in on this so you can watch this gauge. You'll hear me in the back with my air drill going at that oil pump, and hopefully we watch that needle move. We'll rotate the crank over a couple times once we get oil flowing, maybe pop a valve cover off just to verify we're getting oil to the top of all of our push rods, and keep progressing one step closer to firing this thing. All right, it's a new day. Let's start out by looking at our board and seeing what we can scratch off. All right, wire car. Have not done that. Honestly, I've been putting it off just because it's so tedious. Distributor, no. Radiator, yes. Oil lines, yes. Starter, not yet. Make headers, close. Probably going to finish that today or tomorrow. Prime engine, yes. Gauges, also yes. Probably will do better gauges in the car itself. But for now, I do have those mechanical gauges up there. I hooked up the water temp last night. So I've got oil pressure and water temperature. That's all we really need for braking. So just to give you an idea, and man, have these things been a nightmare. I've heard of people having trouble with headers before. I've never really had that big of an issue. Maybe like one little dimple somewhere. But boy, this has been a nightmare. This is the tube right here that is now offending. We made number one tube to get it away from the oil pan. Now this one, in my case, because it has this unnecessary jog inwards, it wants to live in the same place the starter hump does on the bell housing. If I didn't have so much other stuff to do, what I would probably do is cut this off here and here. It'd be great to cut it off here. The problem is this is still oval, and that might create more problems than I want. So I'd probably cut it like right here and right here. I would then take this loose, cut this foot off, rotate the whole tube up, tack that back on, and basically just put a straight piece of tube in here. I'm probably going to regret it. I'll probably be fighting that bell housing later and being, why didn't you just change that tube? And we'll burn that bridge when we get there. But for now, I'm going to put one more little dent right in here. Now you can see I've got that flange bolted to it, and we're all bolted in down here, so nothing should float around while we're dinging this. Now the one other thing I might do is take this bolt out, try to heat this up with my little propane torch that I had to buy and see if I can just give myself a little bit more clearance for a bolt head there. Okay, while that header's cooling down, I am throwing the book at hardware on this passenger side header to try to make it as easy as we can. It's a huge struggle to get all the bolts in because, again, that flange doesn't line up great. I'm never going to buy a separated flange header again if I can get away with it. So I bought a couple of different types of hardware. The header bolts that we had on there were from Speedway. They're basic. They're 7/16 head. First thing we're going to try is studs. So I've got a set of studs that have an Allen key head in the top to help you screw them in. These are 1.5 inches long, so it should leave us about 1 inch sticking out, something like that, maybe a little bit less. And then we've got 12-point ARP heads for them. These are 7/16. I would have preferred 3/8, but it just wasn't really available as far as I could see. Studs aren't a perfect option. They have their own headaches that come along with them, especially when you try to take them out. The whole stud comes out. And it might be a fight to be able to have enough room, especially on that back tube that you just watched me try to clearance. It might be a fight to get a nut on that with the stud installed. We'll see. Other option, again from ARP. These are 3/8 by 16 thread, but they have a 5/16 head on them, which is super small. So that gives us a lot more room. I'm going to try the studs first. I'd rather use the studs. If that doesn't work, though, we'll try these. And honestly, it might be a situation where we use different types of hardware. I really don't want to do that because it looks bad, but that might be the world we find ourselves living in. So I'm going to throw these studs in there. When the header cools off, we'll try to install it. Now, a big benefit to studs, if you can make them work with aluminum heads, if you gack something, you're in theory not gacking the head because the stud's already in there. You know it's in there straight. So if you mess something up, you're going to be messing up either the stud itself or the nut you're trying to put it on, which is a big peace of mind. You're not messing up the threads in your expensive aluminum head. I swear if this works, I'll make out with somebody from ARP. It still sucks, I can tell you that. Earlier I said that I thought it would be easier, I thought it might be easier anyway, to take the collector off and put all the individual tubes up here on the heads themselves and then fight the collector on down at the bottom. So I think I'm going to try that. This is doable. I think I could make this work, but I just sort of feel like I'm going about it the wrong way. I feel like I'm fighting too hard. Before I forget about it, rim flex header gaskets. Accept no substitute. These are pretty much all I use on any engine that I care about. They're graphite. They're nice and thick. The only downside to them is they're a little bit brittle. They're kind of fragile. And normally I like to slot my header gaskets, but the way the Ford's is designed, it's got such a long gap there. I'm mildly concerned about it. I think I'm going to try one spot, see how it goes, and then maybe adjust fire from there. But if you can, on most engine systems, I like to slot these, get it all bolted up, and then just drop it in before you tighten it up. That eliminates, especially like you watch me fighting that other header over there, that eliminates the possibility of me like massively damaging it as I've got it pressed up. Okay, I did manage to fight the gasket in there, just had to use a soft plastic wedge and kind of shimmy stuff around. So that's all the way in. I did knock one of the nuts off, so now I'm trying to put that back on. So we were a little bit successful earlier when we were trying to notch this back tube a little bit, because prior to this, I could not get the box end of a wrench on it. So now I can. I was worried I was going to have to kind of make an open-ended 12-point. So this is going to take a while. I'm not going to make you watch the whole thing, but I'm going to tighten this up most of the way. I'm not going to completely squeeze my gasket just in case I determine I need to take these back off again for some reason. But I'm going to get them most of the way tight so they're not going to move around much, and then we're going to try to put the collector on the bottom. Header installed. I know those won't get to live in there forever because I'm going to have to take them out, if nothing else, to put collector flanges on the back so I can install a real exhaust system. But boy, I hope I don't have to take them out for a minute, because like that was just days of fight. I've never had to fight an individual component like that before. But now I think I kind of know the trick. Take the collector off, put them on individually, and then slam the collector back on from underneath. That seems to be the way to go. I do have the collector back fully installed. I'm going to take a break, and then we'll probably come out and do that other one because we do have to put that one little ding in it where it's hitting the oil pan. And then we'll start on something else. Got a couple of things done off camera. I pulled the driver's side header out, dinged it in the place where I thought I needed to, and then put it back on, and it still contacts just a little bit. So that's a bummer. That has to come back out. But before I do that, I bought more studs to match the other side because I do think that's easier with these guys. So more studs, more ARP nuts. I also purchased the dipstick. So I'm not going to pull this out until I get the dipstick because I'm going to put that in first. It's in the way. We'll dent that just a little bit more and then we should be good. But I tell you what, like, this is Summit and Amazon's favorite build of mine that I've ever done because everything is an extra $15, an extra $30 over and over and over. I also pulled the engine forward a little bit to put the bell housing on because you have to put the bell housing on to put the starter on this. And it's really difficult to get the bell housing bolts in. I'm probably going to solve that because I still got to do some more transmission tunnel work. So I'm going to cut a access panel in the top of that when I sort of finalize that. That'll allow me to remove some of those bolts from the top. That'll make it a lot easier. So right now I'm going to continue in the theme of making this thing look like a real engine. We've got spark plugs for it. I've got fuel pressure regulator for it. This is a badass piece by Rob MC, and if it looks like it was well used, it's because it was on my Firebird for years before I switched over to a fuel injection system. This can be set up deadhead or with a return. I'm going to use it with a return. If you're in the market for a lot of fuel parts, really, but especially regulators or mechanical fuel pumps, look up Rob MC. He's a dude. You know, and whenever you're using aftermarket heads like this is, always look at the manufacturer directions on spark plugs. Don't just assume, hey, you know, any big block Ford spark plug will fit, because they might not. So check and make sure you got the reach right, because that's the last thing you want, is to have your engine all in and then have a spark plug kiss the piston because you put too long of a reach in there. And, you know, on the subject of factory specs with spark plugs, we've all seen Derek do the thing where he holds up spark plugs because gapped. And generally speaking, I agree with that. The one place that I would caution on that is really low compression factory applications, like that old 455 in the wagon over there. Probably has about 7.5 to 1 compression. And that was when it was new, so it might even be less now with, you know, trash ring seal. And when I first put that in with when I put new spark plugs in that, I set them at like 40 and it wouldn't run. You know, it wants like 60 thousandths gap, and that's what they are from the factory. So this engine, or like my Pontiac, would probably run just about with anything. It's a higher compression, very efficient engine. Jesus Christ, this thing has threads a mile long. But with low compression engines, that's where the gap is going to be. Finally got there. That's where the gap is going to be more imperative that you get it right. And we aren't married to these locations necessarily. If they suck, we can always move them. We're going to do the same thing with our coil here. Now, I've been putting off the wiring because I don't want to do it. But the reality also is I couldn't do a lot of it because you need this stuff in place before I can start attaching wires. And this also is going to allow me to see if I like the area of this stuff. And, you know, I mentioned before that I'm going to have to make new engine plates before I actually go racing because I've weakened these too much and they're just ugly. So we'll kind of get an idea of where we want holes drilled long term. And then when I get around to making fresh ones to strengthen them back up, I'll know where the holes need to be. I mean, just as a for instance, this is fine where it is right here now. We're close to this. And I generally like my wiring to run down this side. But I might prefer long term to mount this inside over here, because like right now, if this were to slide down, it would contact that belt, which would be bad. But I can't put it over here right now because this whole section is missing. All right, let's say we make it really look like an engine. Oh yeah, that's sexy. That is sexy. Bob 'em, bob 'em. I like it. Huh. That's a bit sticky. That's weird. So here's the starter we're going to be using. Why is this the right starter for this engine? Well, because it came with the car, and I'm just kind of trusting that the previous owner did their research on it. Might not be the smartest move, but that's what we're going with. So this is like a later model off of, probably is off of a 460, but it's probably off like a late 80s, early 90s truck. And it's like mini starter style, which is nice with headers. Now, one thing that we're going to do with this is going to be like Chevy style. You can see that this actually has a solenoid attached to it, as opposed to the external solenoid that you normally associate with classic Ford vehicles. We're not going to use that for now. Now, when I put the battery all the way in the back, we will use an external solenoid because I don't want that big fat 1/0 gauge wire hot all the time. So we're going to put a solenoid in the back so that wire's only hot when we're starting the vehicle. But for now, we're going to wire it like a Chevy does, where your starter goes here, battery goes here. So the starter is always going to be hot, and then it's only going to be starting when you apply power here. I don't know how well this is going to show up on camera, but basically, scoop this boy in here, and then the way this works is one side of the starter is threaded, and one side, hard to see, and one side of the, there we go. Which one is threaded on this side? But yeah, so one hole in the starter is threaded and one of them's clean, and then on the flip side, one side of the bell housing is threaded and one of them's clean. I do not recall which is which. We do have room here with the header, but not a lot. All right, there's one threaded in. I'm going to thread in the top, which is not going to be fun. And then we'll move on. That sucked. The starter is in, but that tube that was giving us the problem the whole time that I said I'm just going to dent for now, that thing's going to have to move. Because that top starter bolt is not quite impossible, but damn near. I got it moved enough by loosening the header from the top that I could just get a shorty wrench in there and turn it about a 30-second at a time. If I didn't have carpal tunnel before, I definitely do now. But it's in. We'll deal with that later. The headers have to come out anyway, so I can weld collectors on the back of them and stuff. So we'll deal with that later. For now, it's in. I'm going to test the starter and make sure it'll spin this thing over. So this is the battery out of the wagon. I've just got jumper cables up to the starter and to a random ground on the engine. And then I've got this little push down switch to the solenoid switch. And the connections are going to be bad because this is just like alligator clipped on. See, that one already came off. So this is probably not going to turn the starter very quickly because, again, connections aren't good. But if we get it to rotate at all, I think we're going to call that a win and say, okay, the starter works. It's engaging, disengaging, and be happy with that. Here we go. Fire in the hole. So it's moving. It's just weak. It's almost acting like a dead battery. That's not the battery. That's the connection. Yeah. I'm happy with that. I think that's going to be fine. We'll move on. So up to now, we've mostly been doing stuff that isn't particularly fun, but has to get done. Let's do something fun today. Let's make this thing look like a real engine. This is my new distributor. It's from Progression Ignition. It's an electronically controlled distributor that allows you to control timing and all that stuff without the need for like a Terminator X system or anything like that. You do it from your phone. I've wanted to try one of these ever since they came out. I was kind of skeptical, especially like for a drag week project, because you want to avoid items that if they go bad, you're going to have a hard time replacing. But man, there's quite a few people in like my Pontiac world that have these and have had them for 4 or 5 years now. And I've just not heard a negative review. I've not heard anybody say it's let them down. I'm sure there's somebody out there who's had theirs fail on them. But man, they have great reviews. Another nice thing about these, if you're a roller cam guy like I am here, is it comes with a melanized steel distributor gear. Usually aftermarket distributors still come with a cast gear, which will only work with a flat tappet cam, which means if you have a roller, you need to use a bronze gear or a composite gear or a melanized steel gear, which is what all of the roller cam OEMs did starting in like the 80s. So like if you had a 5.0 Mustang with a 302 and a roller cam, it would have come with a melanized gear like this. I've got a bunch of old spark plugs sitting in all the cylinders just to keep dirt and moisture out of it. Pull those out so the engine will rotate over easier. So now we're going to rotate the engine, make sure we're on the power stroke, make sure you're turning it the correct direction. Heavy equipment going by down the street. Sorry if that's annoying. Now, most of you guys probably have done this before, but all you really got to do is stick your finger in the number one spark plug hole, and then when you're on the compression stroke, I said power earlier, I meant compression. When you're on the compression stroke, it's going to blow out. They do make tools for this, stuff that like whistles and things like that, but it's not really necessary most of the time. It is nice when you're working by yourself like this. All right, now I can feel it. See if I can get you guys to hear it. You hear that? And we're 10 degrees before top dead center. Because remember, your spark plug doesn't fire dead at the top, it fires prior to it getting there. Now, for you Ford guys out there, you might watch what I'm about to do and be like, you're totally missing something. But remember, I have an external oil pump. So I'm not going to have the push rod that connects to the oil pump. It's just got a shank of an Allen key, basically, that connects to the top of the oil pump, sits down in here, and then you have to fiddle and make sure you're seated in the bottom of your distributor here, and those two things together spin the oil pump. I don't have that by design. External oil pump. Well, it's a dreary Sunday here in southern Indiana. It's rainy, about 60 degrees. And I was planning on taking the day off and watching football, but the referees have already upset me. So I'm going to come out and work on my hot rod a little bit. Let's go revisit our list real quick. So where are we at? All right, distributor in. Starter in. Make headers. Those still need a little bit of work, but we're calling those good for now. We'll make some adjustments to those when we pull them out to weld the collectors on. So we're going to call that good. Which leaves us with wiring the car. Maybe I'll go work on a different project. No, all right, let's get some wiring in. To be honest, I really don't mind wiring as much as I'm making it out. It just sucks on that car because it's a universal harness trying to mate it to the remnants of the factory harness. And I know I'm going to end up having to find some fiddly adapter plugs for the headlights and stuff like that. But let's at least get it started. Let's wire it up enough that we can make the engine run. First thing, this is going to set us up for down the road because this is not at all normal wiring. So we're going to run this whole thing through this power block. Got a couple of pilot holes drilled. We're going to put this on the wall, on the firewall here. And I don't know if I mentioned this before, but this is not the factory position of the firewall. The whole thing is set back a little bit. The trans tunnel is cut out for the big old T56 bell housing, and honestly, that probably needs to be cut out more a little bit later, but it's functional for now. So initially, I'm just going to throw this in with some tech screws. I've got some pilot holes drilled. If I decide later that I'm happy with where this is mounted, I'll put rib nuts in. But it's a lot easier to weld up the hole left by a self-tapping screw than it is to remove a rib nut and weld up that hole if I decide I don't like the position. Start off by throwing a couple of magnetic zip tie anchors on the firewall. These things are great. I love these. Even if you don't trust them long term, they're great for just kind of figuring out where you want to put everything like this.
Watching your mouth move, damn you look stupid. I feel like everyone
everybody. It has been a few days and I've been doing a lot of boring stuff off camera. You know, things like taking the ends of the wires that I think are going to be hot, but I'm not hooking up right now, putting electrical tape over them so we don't cause power to ground and burn the whole garage down. Using my multimeter and checking to make sure things that are supposed to be hot are hot and things that aren't supposed to be hot aren't hot. Not particularly entertaining, but necessary. We've got our radiator back in. It's not mad. These are going to have to change. This is ugly. I don't like it, but it's not going anywhere to mount it in. My hose that I made is in. My progressive ignition distributor is all hooked up. There's only a few circuits of wiring that are actually hooked up, but it's all that we need right now. Basically just the starter and the distributor is powered. Everything else is not powered. Everything else that is not necessary, headlights, whatever, they're not hooked up right now. Now, I was really planning on trying to fire this thing this weekend, but winter has shown its first appearance in Indiana. We've entered that weird phase in the Midwest here, at least in the southern Midwest, where it doesn't know what season it is. It's early November, and it was 60 a few days ago, and it's at 28 today. I really don't want to try and fire up an expensive engine first time dealing with sub-freezing temperatures. So I don't think we're really going to try to get it super going this weekend because it's supposed to raise back up into the 60s next weekend. Full on start might wait till next weekend. But here's what I do want to do. I've got some sort of test wiring hooked up. I've got the battery out of the wagon just below this, which is probably not quite big enough for this car, but it's 700 cold cranking amps. It should be enough. And we've got that factory style starter that's out of like a 92, 94 F250 with a 460 because they made 460s well into the 90s. Maybe even into the 2000s, I can't remember. I also, which I'm strangely proud of, put a factory ignition switch in this that I bought out of a swap meet last year. Looks pretty cool. The rest of the interior is stripped, but I have a factory for ignition, which for whatever reason makes me happy. And I did test it, and it does turn the engine, but man, it doesn't seem like it's turning as fast as it should. I'm not sure it's enough to start it. So here's what we're going to try to do today. We're going to put a little bit of fuel in the carburetor, and we're just going to see if it tries to bark off. Because if that starter isn't strong enough for this engine, I want to order it now so that next weekend we have a starter that's going to be powerful enough to really crank this engine over. So that's the plan right now. I've got some 93 octane over there. We're going to run a little clickety-clack electric fuel pump to this, turn the key, and just see what happens. If it does fire off, we're not going to let it run for long. Like, best case scenario, it runs just long enough for me to verify timing. These come preset at 10 degrees and it wants you to confirm it's at 10 degrees and then you base everything else off that. So worst case, nothing happens. That starter is not spinning the motor fast enough. I have to buy a much more powerful starter than the AutoZone Duralast unit that's in it now. Best case scenario, it fires off. We let it run just long enough to verify timing. Sound like a plan? Let's do it. Another thing super important as I tighten some of these lines. When you're getting ready to fire something like this, clean up around the area. With projects like this, you don't know what you forgot. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know, you forgot to tighten the fuel line, fire starts, whatever. Fire extinguisher right over there. I don't know if you can see it, but it's right there. I know where it's at, so if something bad happens, I can get to it really quickly. But that's part of it. Clear the area. Don't have a bunch of clutter around you if you can avoid it, because if you need to get somewhere quick, you don't want to be tripping over cables. You want to know where your safety devices are, things like that. So it sounds stupid, but clean up around your area, make sure you have a fire extinguisher, and make sure you're not going to trip and hurt yourself if something bad happens while you're trying to stop the problem. Other thing, fluid specific, you want to make sure things are clean. You know, if you got oil or whatever laying around from where you originally filled the engine is dripping down, you don't know if your engine's leaking or not when you're first firing. So do your best to clean up so if there's a leak, you can identify it. I'm super stressed out. Like, this is exciting, but it's also super stressful. There's nothing that should go wrong, especially since I'm not even like trying to fire it up and drive it. And if something does go wrong, it's probably going to be a leak. But it's an expensive motor. The expensive project's been kind of coming together for a long time, a lot slower than I wanted it to. Excited and terrified at the same time. This is distilled water, by the way. You know, if you've got an expensive engine like this, don't put hose water in it. That's going to immediately corrode it. And because this is a race engine, I don't want to put any normal antifreeze in it. So I'm probably going to have to use some sort of block heat or something during the winter. Because while plenty of us have gone down the track with antifreeze in it, I know I've done it, it's not recommended. If you ever spilled antifreeze on your floor, it doesn't dry. It's very difficult for the racetracks to clean up quickly. I got 5 gallons of this. So I really don't know how much this is going to take. I thought 5 would be plenty. I don't hear it falling on the floor anywhere, which is a good sign. We're 3 gallons in, and when I shine a light down there, I think I can see it.
about 6 inches down. There's going to be a photo finish here. I was thinking it's probably going to be like 3.5, 4. It might be 4.5 to 6. All right, that was a 4 full gallons. Oh, we're close to the top now. I made a big speech about making sure all your pathways are clear. This side of the vehicle is kind of difficult to do that with because not only do I have equipment, but this is also the side where my fuel and battery, and I've got my big battery cart here in case I want to use the 200 amp charger thing. Just in case it's not spinning fast enough, I can throw that 200 amp start feature on there, see if we can make it spin just a little bit faster. But we're going to do the best we can, but that's also where my fire extinguisher is over there, so I can get to it much easier. So here's what we're going to do. We've got a little, they call them clickety-clack. This one doesn't really do that. It's just more of a chugga pump. This is a $25 pump off of Amazon. I've got it wired up with super long leads with handy-dandy alligator clips on the end. And then we're going to run a fuel line from here. This is just 3/8 fuel hose that we're going to run into this can of 93 octane gasoline. Now in the middle of it, so we can tell that things are working, here's the classic Wix 33003 filter, 3/8 line. We're going to put that in here somewhere so we can verify that fuel is indeed flowing. All right, I know it's not going to be easy to see over here, so let me just show you what we got going on. These wires don't do anything. They're all capped off. See where I put black tape over all of them. So okay, if one of them is hot and they hit metal, we're not going to burn anything to the ground, create any sparks. Here's our filter. Probably tape that down. So line down. Here's our pump with a couple little magnetic zip ties holding it up. It's below our gas can. And sort of last piece of the puzzle, your average cheap fuel hose like this is not meant to be submerged, so I've just got a piece of steel hose on the end that we're going to submerge into the tank here. Look at that. Fuel coming up. All right. Well, we've detected our first problem, but there is a leak right there. And I watched these fuel bowls come up. You probably can't tell because they're fully filled. But as I watched these come up, they both went well past half and all the way full. So both of these fuel bowls are too full, which is probably why that one's leaking everywhere. So this is not the most elegant of solutions, but it works. This is like a Harbor Freight disposable paint cup that they use in their Spectrum cup systems. I took one of the bottom fuel bowl bolts out of each side and stuck this in there and drained the fuel out of it. So now it should be low enough that I can adjust the adjuster nuts way lower, and then we can bring it up slowly because that's a lot easier to do. Before I fill this back up and really piss myself off, I'm actually going to go ahead and pull this carburetor off because even with it drained, I'm getting a little drip, especially if I hit this rear accelerator pump. I don't think that accelerator pump back there is tight. I think that's where that leak is coming from. We still need to adjust the bowls. That's a problem. But I believe that leak is coming from back there. But I drained it enough that they're not high now, and it's still dripping a little bit out of this rear bowl. So let's go ahead and pull the carburetor off. This is why you check this stuff. This is why you don't just turn the key and start a fire. So hopefully you can see this. That is still dripping. So I'm glad I did this because I would have been really upset if I'd have put it back on the engine and then had the same problem. Those screws were a little bit loose, but here's the funny thing. Now I've adjusted this low enough that I made a huge swing. I turned it like a turn and a half, which you would normally not do. But so now we're not even in the sight bowl, so that's fine. But that rear accelerator pump is leaking. I do not remember if I filmed this or not because it was like a month ago. This saga has taken a while. But when I first pulled these bowls off just to check and see what the jet sizes and all were in this carburetor, I noticed that the front bowl, even though this carb looks like it was barely ever used, if ever, was crunchy. The front accelerator pump was not pumping. The rear one was. So I didn't have a 30cc pump new, but I had another carburetor, pulled that off, replaced that with a pretty much new accelerator pump for the front. The rear one I left alone because you could feel it squishing and pumping fine. This one was super crunchy in the front. But clearly that one is hardened too and is now leaking. So now I got to pull this rear bowl off. Now luckily I do have one of the big boys. This is brand new I had sitting on the shelf. So we're not dead in the water. I'm going to go ahead, even though this is dripping, we've already got gas everywhere anyway. So I'm going to go ahead and adjust the bowl while we're connected. And then I'll pull this off and replace this.
Well, this has been an irritating hour of my life, but we replaced that accelerator pump. It doesn't seem to be leaking now, and I'm just sort of, I've got power connected to the battery, but I'm just sort of slowly grounding the pump and then letting the bowls come up. No leaks, that's good. Clearly we have fuel flow. I watched the floats come up, but we're not quite in the window with fuel yet. So we're going to make a couple of small adjustments and call it good. Well, that took entirely too long. But it's on there. It's not leaking. The fuel bowls are at least ballpark now. We're going to let some of this fuel that I've spilled a million times evaporate. Fan going in the background with a vent window, and I've got the door behind you guys a little bit cracked open, even though it's 28 degrees outside. So we're going to let some of the fuel get out of here, especially for open headers, so any fuel that I may have spilled would be directly under the car. We don't want to catch a backfire or something and have a kaboom. I'm going to go in and get something to eat. We're going to let the whole thing vent out, and then we'll come back out and do what we said we were going to do 2 hours ago. It's been a really trying day, but we're still going to see if this thing makes noise, because again, no matter what, I need to know if I need to buy a new starter so I can have it here before next weekend if we need to. It's kind of late now. Doors open behind you, exhaust fan in the background over here. No matter what, we're not letting it run long. The bowls are full. I'm not even turning the fuel pump back on, so anything that does, it's only going to do, you know, with the fuel in the bowls. I've got my timing light up. I'm hoping I can run over and see what the timing is, how close we are to the 10 that the distributor's preset at. And I've got the idle turned up, what I think is probably going to be pretty high. It wouldn't surprise me if it does light off, which we still don't know if it's going to, if it cranks up to like 1800 RPM. When I asked the builder what his break-in procedure was, always, when you have an expensive engine, always ask them what they want you to do. That way, if there's a problem, they can't say that you didn't do what they wanted. It's roller cam. Obviously, so break-in is not nearly as important as his flat tappet. But he said, just don't let it sit at a low idle for a long period of time. That was like his only request. He didn't even really care about oil. He just said, put a nice quality SAE oil in for the first 50 miles and then change it. And don't let it sit at idle for a long time. After fighting with that stupid carburetor for a long time, it would be really nice to get some good news here. Our Lady of Blessed Acceleration, don't fail me now. May our bearings be oiled and our combustion remain internal. Let's hit it. Fire in the hole. Son of a bitch, that was easy! Well, hot damn, that fired up real good. It was not idling high enough for me to get a good reading, and honestly, I put the coil in a really bad spot for me to try to see what the timing was. But it works. That's a huge win. I don't need a new starter, also a huge win. I guess I'm going to have to try that again with more fuel and idle it up a little bit higher. But hey, a win's a win. Let's keep moving with this. That front fuel bowl is still out. It was off camera, but there was a lot of hassle with this. I finally figured out what was going wrong, but now that front fuel bowl is clearly low. All right, fire in the hole again. Hell yeah. It's smoky, it's loud as shit, It was idling way lower than I thought, but we're at 10 degrees now, just like the distributor wants us to be. And after a load of money spent and way longer than I wanted, this has been going on for like a year and a half now, it runs. I'm gonna go have a drink. Oh, and I forgot to say so, but it did have good oil pressure the whole time. 'Tis a new day, maidens and gents. Last time we were here, we had just fired this thing up. Huge victory after fighting with that carburetor. I actually fought with that carburetor for a lot longer than it showed on camera. I ended up about 2 hours into a 5-minute task because one of the adjustment nuts mushroomed, and I didn't know that. I couldn't tell what was wrong until I finally broke down and pulled the whole thing off, which I should have done a lot earlier. But I was crazy frustrated by the end, so it was a huge victory when this thing roared right to life. Didn't have enough RPM in it. I did not let it run very long. Engine builder specifically told me not to let it run for a long time at low RPM while we're trying to break it in. Now this progression ignition distributor, it comes factory set before you put any kind of tune in it, locked at 10 degrees. I think that I got it set at that 10 degrees before we shut down last weekend. That's what we're gonna check here today. We're gonna fire it up real quick, make sure we are at 10 degrees, and then we're gonna put a tune in it. That's probably gonna be the end, and then we'll reconvene next time for part 2 of this, where we try to actually get this thing to run and drive under its own power. I have most of the parts to do that, but it is still gonna nickel and dime me to death a little bit on that front too. Now, while last week was a huge win, didn't come without a little bit of defeat too. There were some leaks that I have identified. I'm not crazy worried about it at this point, but we'll keep an eye on it. There's a small leak from my external oil filter adapter here, which is a little bit weird. I put an oil filter wrench on it, tightened it a little bit. It seems like it's coming from the back. I don't know if it's from the oil filter O-ring itself not seating, or if maybe there's a crack in the housing. That'll be something that I'll keep an eye on. I tightened it down. We'll see if that still leaks this time. There's also coming out of the rear main seal area, which is always scary just because it's a pain in the ass to fix. I have a mixture of both clean oil and clean water. Now the clean water I'm not overly concerned about because I sort of discovered that the block plugs that were in this, I took for granted that those were tight, and they weren't, basically. And I don't know if they have any thread sealing around them or anything. So I did get a little bit of a turn in those. It's really hard, especially the one on this side because of the header, but I got enough in there that hopefully those aren't leaking anymore. I think it's still dripping because they were running down the oil pan kind of flange down back to the back of the bell housing, and I think there's just a fair amount that's just back there that I can't get to because of the bell housing and the engine plate and stuff that's sitting there. Same with the oil. I'm still sort of hoping the oil is just residual for me spilling some when I was originally filling it, and it's just sitting back there and shaking out over time. Worst case scenario, we have a rear main seal leak, and a lot of times when you start to get some heat in these things, they seal up and get better anyway. So we're not really worried about it at this point. There's no evidence that the oil and water are mixing in the engine or in the radiator, so we're just gonna see what happens. And before we fire this thing up, I got some extensions for Summit today. These are like 18-inch extensions. They were as cheap as I could get them. And then I had a buddy locally let me borrow a set of collector muffler baffle deals that I'm throwing into the end of these collectors and hopefully just take the edge off the open header a little bit. It is so incredibly loud here in the garage, and unfortunately the car doesn't have a transmission or anything in it. The brakes don't work. I can't easily push it outside to let it run. It's so loud, it's hard to really tell if something was going wrong. If it was knocking, it would probably be difficult to tell because it's so crazy loud in here. So hopefully this takes the edge off a little bit. I already installed it in this one, just with a self-tapping screw in the end of it. It slides over the collector. The clamps did not get here, unfortunately. Those will be here tomorrow. But so we're probably gonna do the same thing on this end, just throw a self-tapper in it at the front. It might have a tiny leak, but it'll be better than nothing. So an extension and a header baffle, hopefully we quiet it down. We're about to hit the go button again, but I wanted to point out something. I know a lot of people really like old school, like dial back timing lights, and there's nothing wrong with that. I am a big proponent of electronic timing lights though, especially for like first fires and tuning and stuff like that. Just because these have a lot of different stuff on them other than just timing. It has a voltmeter for starters. And much more importantly, along with doing your timing, it has a tachometer in it. So I don't have to hook up a tach to see what my RPM is. It's just sitting right here. So even for like carburetor tuning, when you've got your vacuum gauge hooked up and you're tuning to get your max RPM and your max vacuum and stuff like that, you can see it very easily. I don't have to be going around looking at the tach in the car, even if I did have one, which I don't yet in this case. So this is a Matco one. I'm pretty sure it's just a rebranded Innova. You can probably get a lot of them off Temu that are the same thing, or, you know, eBay, whatever else, and they're all gonna work. I have a dial back one as well, but I really like these. Okay, here we go. All the doors are open, window with an vent fan in the back, fire extinguisher over there. Got my screwdriver right here so I can adjust idle. Got my timing light. And we're gonna remember to check oil pressure this time. Give it a little bit of gas. All right, fire in the hole. It's still really loud. Man, looks pretty good. It's still really loud. It's still quite smoky. I'm gonna put a fan in so it starts blowing stuff toward the other fan in the back. But we did confirm we're at 10. I've got the idle set at about 1250 RPM right now, so it's not super low. I'm gonna throw it on the battery charger because we're not running the alternator right now. And then I'm gonna play with this progression ignition distributor and try to put a real timing curve in it. I honestly don't like open headers. I know a lot of people do, and maybe if it was outside it would sound better, but in here in a garage, I just think it sounds poppy and not very good. I very much want to buy a set of mufflers for this. Well, I found my oil leak up here at the front anyway. This plug right here, because this is meant to be able to go multiple directions, is not tight. It was just kind of finger tight in there. So I don't know how much of a mess this is about to make. Okay, I'm gonna throw a little bit of sealant on this. And we're back in. Okay, hopefully that solves that problem. Then we just have to worry about the one at the rear main seal back there. Getting dark out of the lighting might suck. So we've generated a table. I might do a video on this in the future. I don't know if there's good videos available for progression ignition out there right now, but we'll do that separately if I determine that we need to do that. We're gonna fire this up one more time with our kind of more accurate timing table rather than just being locked at 10 degrees. I went pretty conservatively. It's 16 degrees idle and I think 32 all in, and have all in at 28 or 2800 RPM, I think. So nothing crazy right now. There's a rev limiter. That's a big deal. It's not going to come into play here, but rev limiters can really save your engine if something in the rear end breaks, you know, and your engine's not going to rev to the moon. Hopefully that lighting's a little bit better there, except for that one blinking in the background. Don't have epilepsy, I guess. So we're going to fire this up one more time, see if it runs any differently. It does have you set what your idle RPM is, which I said before when we were just running at 10, I have it set at the carburetor at 1200 RPM. I don't know if this is going to adjust spark to match that. So we're going to check timing. Hopefully that's just 16 at idle. I don't know what the RPM is going to do, so that's going to be kind of interesting. So we'll see. But it's cool. You get a little gauge set up here. It actually even has a speedometer. I assume it's GPS, but that's pretty neat. So it has speedometer, RPM. We can see if the RPM matches our attack, and it also displays a number for your timing, and we can make sure those things match. So here we go. Let's fire it up one last time. We're going headgear back up because it is still stupid loud. Fire in the hole. Okay, that's about 1,000 RPM. What's it say over here? We're matching, that's good. timing says 16. I'm gonna check the timing light and see if that matches. Pretty good. It's moving around a little bit, but it's between 14 and 17, 15 and 16 right there. So I think we can say that that works. We appear to have fixed this leak, which is good. There's nothing crazy coming out. There's no fire coming out of the tailpipe. Oil pressure is rock solid at about 75 pounds. We're just starting to come up on temperature gauge now. So we've got a little heat in the engine, which is good. Now we can let it rest. Didn't smoke that much that time, which is good. Oil leak at the front is fixed. I don't really see much oil coming out of the back, the rear main seal. We still get some water dripping there. Again, I don't know how much of that is residual after I tighten those plugs a little bit and how much of it is still coming out. It's very difficult to see with the headers in the way. I will also say, while that external oil pump clearly works and is cool and holds dead-ass steady oil pressure, it takes a touch longer than I'm comfortable with to come up after the engine fires. Like, if this was an electronic pressure transducer, maybe I'd be seeing that number faster. But I'll be honest, as much as I was really proud of my key in there, I might wire in a switch to turn the ignition off so I can turn the key and have it crank for 4 or 5 seconds before we actually light off to try and just prime the engine some in the future. Just because it's an expensive engine and you want to make sure you have oil when it lights off. And you guys have seen it. This thing wants to run. It fires immediately to life. Even when it was at 0 degrees when we first fired it. You know, it had no timing in it. It still lit right off and sat idling at 600 RPM, which is wild. This thing it doesn't have a huge cam in it. It's just big. 503 cubic inches. It's a relatively mild motor under that. Hopefully it's a mild 700 horsepower. I don't think it has enough cam for that. The builder thinks it does. Maybe we'll try to get it to a dyno and see. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching. It has been a journey with this car. I traded for this car, got to be the better part of 2 years ago now, and to just have it first fired, man, it feels good. It really does. Feels like that was a huge step. And especially for it to fire right to life, just to want to run. This thing wants to breathe. It's amazing. I can't wait to be bang shifting gears in this. That's going to do it for this episode. Please like and subscribe, and please join us again for part 2, where we take this from engine running to running down the road. That's probably going to entail yanking the engine back out just because it'll be easier to install the clutch that way. It'll allow me to fix that one header tube that's still kind of touching the bell housing over there and making it impossible to install a starter. And it'll also allow us to make sure those water jacket plugs are sealed properly so we're not still dripping water on the floor. Again, please like and subscribe. This was a fun one. It was a big milestone. I love all your comments. We're going to try to get some merch going before the end of the year. We'll see you next time.